A self-image is basically a mental picture that we all carry around with us on kind of what we think we're capable of, I suppose. So it's like a blueprint of your investor identity. Welcome to the Property Mindset Podcast. I'm Emma Howitt, mentor investor, and your guide to building wealth, freedom, and personal transformation through property. Property isn't just about bricks and mortar, it's about building the life that you truly desire. In this space, we don't just talk about strategy, we also deep dive into mindset. And this is something that I found is really missing in other industries. But for me, in the property circles, it's been an absolute game changer. So today's title is Why Your Self Image is Your Most Valuable Property Asset. And it is honestly something that a lot of investors really ignore, and that is your self image. As property investors, we might obsess over interest rates, what's the hottest postcode at the moment, or, where are you going to find your next below market value deal? But what if your actual real blocker isn't your portfolio, it isn't the market, but it's perhaps that quiet voice inside you saying, I'm not a real investor. So do stick around because we're unpacking why your self image is your most valuable property asset and how upgrading it can supercharge your results even more than changes in the market. So let's turn your dreams into actions and actions into success. So, where to start looking at your self image as your most valuable property asset? So, I suppose the place to start is, well, what is a self image? What does it really mean for property investors? And a self-image is basically a mental picture that we all carry around with us on kind of what we think we're capable of, I suppose. So it's like a blueprint of your investor identity. You may have heard yourself or you may have heard others say things like, oh, I'm rubbish with numbers. Spreadsheets are just not my thing. Or um, I'm just a lucky small landlord, or have you heard people say I'm a deal making machine building an empire? So I was introduced to Maxwell Maltz, who was a psychologist, by Bob Proctor. And he's absolutely nailed this whole self image in his classic book, Psycho-Cybernetics. And he talks about the fact that you can never outperform your self image. So if you feel you are not reaching your full potential, it is a really good place to start looking at your self image because our nervous system doesn't just hear the words that we say, but it literally is like a GPS. It directs your life and the way it goes. So just as a, really simple example, you might get, Mr. Investor A, who is constantly thinking, I'm terrible at spreadsheets, I'm really bad with money. And that can result in their actions. They might sort of just look over deals. They might not find the real detail in it. They they probably do avoid spreadsheets. They might pass on joint venture opportunities. Whereas you might have Mr. or Mrs., let's say, investor B saying, I'm an investor and I'm sharpening my skills. They definitely know that they're not perfect yet, but they really are looking at improving every day. They crunch numbers. They perhaps get help from other people. They're out networking, really trying to understand, how they can improve, and they look at scaling. So this really is the same market inherently on the outside. They look like the same, the same investors wanting to do the same things. But what's different is their self-image, and it will result in a wildly kind of different portfolio. So this whole self-image, it is definitely not fluff. It really is. It's a foundation stone of every offer that you make. So another one to look at is Carol Dweck, and she talks about a fixed versus growth mindset. And in the property game, as in any game, but we're talking property here, it is so key. And this is not some mumbo jumbo made up thing. It is literally down to science. And Carol Dweck is a Stanford psychologist, and she is the author of Mindset, the New Psychology of Success. She discovered that there are two mindsets, and they've even brought it into some schools, which I just think is amazing. You have a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And the fixed mindset says, I am what I am, and that's it. My talent is what it is. And, when I fail, that means just because I'm really rubbish at that. um, but your growth mindset would say things like, I really can learn, I can improve. And Dweck puts it perfectly. The view you adopt for yourself profoundly affects the way you lead your life. I'm going to say it again. The view you adopt for yourself profoundly affects the way you lead your life. Incredibly powerful. And she adds in, becoming is better than being. Coming is better than being. So if we were to apply this to property, that kind of fixed mindset might be as simple as, and I hear myself saying things like this, I I feel, making a lowball offer, gives me that kind of grinding gut feeling. So I could be saying, I'm no good at negotiating with agents. You might have given a lowball offer once and you got rejected in a belittling way. We know that sometimes agents can not be that nice. There are lots who are lovely out there, but equally, you may have had a really bad experience. And from that may have really profoundly affected you. You might have, barely view properties anymore. But if you've got a growth mindset, it's all about talking to yourself and saying, I'm building my negotiation muscle. You start studying scripts. You might role play with your kids, your husband, friends when you go out networking. And you start turning that no into knowledge, into data. And you can see just by talking through this, it's so obvious, but it's not so easy to do. The results are that you're likely to get more deals. You're likely to be able to put a better upfront margin into your deal. You might get, a thicker skin through market changes. So your investors who have this growth identity, they might treat a bad flip or a tenant nightmare as real learning, as real benefits to them on how they might do something different next time. And it's not a personal verdict on themselves. It's not you're rubbish. It just is these things happen and what can we do to change? And this is how things can really change in building a portfolio if you have a growth mindset compared to a fixed one. So the next part to look at is our killer labels that property investors can carry. So what is a killer label? And these are potentially really tripping you up, and I always find it easier when I'm mentoring excuse me, if they're the sort of people that are saying these kind of killer labels out loud, because there are definitely people that are saying them internally, and that's more difficult to pick up, isn't it? Because you don't hear them saying it. But there are really four common ones. So, number one, I'm stupid. Now, we've all heard that, whether it's you're stupid just in general. You might feel that, the legals are too much for you, tax calculations, yields, it's just too much for you. You may feel that there's so many things around property, so many strategies that it's just overwhelming and too much for you. And this can go back to days of being at school. Somebody may have made just a really flippant comment, and your little human that you were took it to heart at the time for whatever reason and buried it into your subconscious. And that's made you feel stupid. And that's just not the case. You can definitely reframe. I'm smart. I'm mastering investor tools just one step at a time. Something so simple to look at it from a different way. So what's the second common killer label? I'm undisciplined. I'm lazy. I procrastinate. I really should have done the numbers last night, but I was tired and I turned on Netflix. We can all have issues. We can all be tired. We can all have these things. If it happens, don't beat yourself up. It's all about saying to yourself, I'm building investor habits and I'm starting with one call to an agent today, and start building on that. The third killer label, and I definitely hear this a lot. Oh, I come from a poor background. I come from the wrong side of the town. And that really brings them to feel out of place at perhaps networking events. It makes them feel out of place talking to joint venture partners. And that can have a massive effect. In fact, even myself, I was talking to a potential buyer of one of my properties the other day, and oh my gosh, they just had the biggest budget I could ever imagine. Like, millions and tens of millions they had. And I instantly had that internal subconscious saying to me, oh, doubting myself in having these conversations. But inherently, he was still just a chap, just a normal person, but he just had a different mindset. And that's perfectly fine. We might not have come from that size of finance behind you, but that doesn't mean that you can't be like that. How could we reframe that? So you might say something like, my background fuels my hustle because I'm an asset builder now. I love that. And another final one of the four common killer labels that we give to ourselves: I'm a failure. Maybe you lost a great deal and somebody else made the money from it. Maybe you had a terrible tenant. Maybe you had an unexpected tenant move out. There's just so many things, aren't there, on a daily basis in property that can go wrong. But what are we going to do with that? Are we going to continue to say, I'm a failure? Is that really true? Absolutely not. So we could reframe it with, that deal taught me that I'm an investor who really learns from the wins and the losses. And that can have a massive, massive change for us. And again, going back to Maxwell Maltz, who wrote Psycho-Cybernetics, he talks about your self-image being inherently like a thermostat, and it regulates what you accept as kind of normal success. So quite often, and I, give the example of say a footballer. So we heard a lot about this, didn't we, in the early days when footballers started earning crazy money. And quite often they came from, council house backgrounds, not with a lot of money. And what did they do? They got that money, they spent it all, and they ended up back in that council house because their thermostat of what normal success was not in those realms of huge money coming in. They didn't know what to do with it, and they just, not consciously but subconsciously, just dragged them back to that setting of normal success. So we have to change the setting, and then your actions will start following. And one of the ways to do that is we have to drop those labels. We have to listen to ourselves on what we are saying to ourselves. And once we start reframing what we say to ourselves, you'll see the changes. You'll see yourself getting bolder with making offers. So the next thing is 4 tools that you can use to upgrade your investor self-image. If you're ready to take your property journey to the next level, check out my Property Success Mindset Formula. It's a course on Udemy, and inside you'll discover actionable strategies and exercises designed to shift your thinking, boost your confidence, and help you navigate property challenges with clarity. Whether you're just starting out or looking to break through to a new level, this course delivers the mindset tools professional investors use every day. Visit the link in the show notes to unlock your property potential. Your biggest asset is not just your portfolio, but the way you think. So we've talked about the theory. So here's some actions that you can use. I'd highly recommend doing these daily. You know, if you've increased your portfolio within 6 months, you can send me 10%. No, I'm joking. So number one is an identity statement. This is literally just something as simple of if your identity is constantly saying to you, I'm bad with money, then reframe and adopt something like, I'm a sharp property investor multiplying assets. And think about having sort of 3 of these. And if you're really rubbish about these, use AI. I find AI amazing. It comes back with things that I'm like, wow, that's so inspiring. So if you can't think of anything, get some help around that. And make sure, by the way, you believe them. Okay. Because if it's kind of like, oh, in 6 weeks' time, I'm going to have, £50,000 a month income from property, and currently you're at nothing. That's not really realistic, is it? So it's all about, going for big growth, but equally, when you're making these identity statements, they do also have to be kind of believable. Number 2, deal visualization. Now, this is massive, and you have to support it with how you feel. Okay. So it's not good enough just to sit there looking with your eyes shut, thinking, oh, yeah, just made the deal. Great. Open your eyes and carry on. That's not enough. You've really got to feel yourself touring an amazing property. Feel maybe the crunchiness underfoot of a really bad carpet, because that's what you're looking for potentially. You're looking for a massive doer-upper. Or it might be, a conversation with an agent where they're congratulating you because you've got the deal. Maybe you feel the handshake and you feel that elation in your tummy or in your heart. Because remember, your brain can't tell the difference between imagination and reality. So you've got to spend as much time in that place of feeling how great it is to be successful, to having that deal go through, to having those conversations, because that really primes your subconscious to look for that success and move forward. So 3 is to reframe the questions. And this is like after a setback or something. So just simply like, what skill does this build? How is this enabling me to be sharper? And this goes back to Carol Dweck. She talks about this growth hack that turns pain into progress. We can all feel sorry for ourselves, but we can either dwell on it and let that label us, or we can turn it into something that will enable us to grow. And then the final one is looking at your environment and maybe doing a audit on it. So do you hang out with positive, supportive other investors? Or are you hanging out with the lucky amateurs? Make sure that the people you're hanging around with, the masterminds, are people who are also really pushing to improve themselves. Or is it that person? And we've all got it. We go to a networking event and month after month, they tell you about how terrible their deal is going. And I'm afraid now I just kind of smile, "Oh, I'm so sorry for you." And then I just got to leave. Yeah. It's all about surrounding yourself with people who can help you become a better version of you as a property investor. And literally, your circle mirrors your self image. So it is so, so key. And do remember to, to track those, even those small wins that you get every day. So just to remind you that the toolkit um, is one, identity statements, just 1 minute a day, preferably three. Two is deal visualization, that real success that you can see. Three, reframing questions, and this is kind of post a setback. And then four, your environment audit. Who are you spending time with? So I've already mentioned some of the books that can really help you supercharge your sort of tactics to give you this better self image. So again, Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz. It's quite a read, but it's really worth it. And I've listened to it. I found reading it too much, but listening to it has been great. And it really is a blueprint for self-image hacks, and really perfect as well if strategy for you is easy, but the execution is a bit more challenging. So yeah, it really helps you with that. Next one is again Mindset by Carol Dweck. Again, it's very much this fixed versus growth mindset, and really pushing over those fears of I can't raise finance. Change it to I am in the process of meeting amazing people and raising finance. There's another one, The Millionaire Real Estate Investor by Gary Keller, and this is all about kind of mindset and deals, and it ties to self-belief, to being able to scale a portfolio. And then the absolute classic, and if you haven't read it, you have to read it, is Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And this just is an absolute classic on asset mindset, shifting from a kind of employee identity to an investor identity. And obviously I am going to add those into the show notes. So do jump on that. So your properties really do reflect your spreadsheet and your hustle, but more importantly, at the core, they mirror how you see yourself. So it is so much about upgrading your self image and not being affected by a market wobble or anything like that. And as Warren Buffett said, the most important quality for an investor is temperament, not intellect. Build yours. So, what are you going to do this week? I would really highly recommend that you look and re listen to what we've spoken about today, because if you feel that you're not getting the results that you want, or things are going wrong more than you would like, it is potentially time for you to do a self image upgrade. And quite often you have to do that a number of times in your lifetime, because you'll get to a certain level of success and then it's kind of like, oh, I'm stalling again. And that's because your inner person doesn't believe that they can be any more. And so that's where we have to have this self-image upgrade. So as always, remember that property success isn't just about what you do. It's about how you think and of course the state you're in when you make decisions. And when you combine a smart strategy with a calm, focused, well rested mind, there's literally no limit to what you can build over the long term. So, if this episode has really helped you see your self image in a new light, I would highly recommend you go and listen to episode 41. And that's all about how to ignore property doom porn and actually invest. And in this episode, I dive into tuning out of this fear mongering headlines that we have, negative forecasts, panic in the markets, new acts coming in, and shows you simple mindset filters to actually spot opportunities rather than following what everyone else is and potentially freezing in those kind of market situations. So if you're ready to pair, an upgraded self-image, like we've been talking about in this episode, but also kind of noise-proofing clarity on, ignoring the drama around you, then episode 41 will really help you kind of cut through that chaos and build your portfolio with confidence. And as always, if you know someone struggling on their property journey, please do share this episode. It could be the absolute game changer that they need. And remember, the more people we help, the greater our own wealth in every sense of the word. Growing this community means growing the potential we all have to succeed. And as always, your mindset is your greatest property. Keep building it.